do our introductions digitally today. So if you haven't done that, go ahead and kind of try to dive in. And if you just don't want to mess with the technology, you can write on the board.
Oh my God, I feel it in the air, telephone wires above, a sizzling like a snare, honey, I'm on fire. I feel it.
You want the sound? It's the Spotify. At the bottom. We're totally using her Spotify. Thank you, Lauren Sloan. So if the technology is working, just go to one of the marker boards, and what I'm asking on there is your name and the one question you are hoping today will answer. So if the technology just doesn't work for you, we have 3 marker boards for the same purpose. All right.
So hello and welcome. Thank you very much for coming today. Hope you're enjoying your salad. Couple things that are going to be coming up very recent in the next 2 weeks. Next Tuesday we have a copyright workshop led on Tuesday by our very own librarian
Kristen Burkholder.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next Friday is also the D2L conference that is going to be hosted in the Sarkees building. So please come sign up so they can expect you for that. And then also today is the deadline for the Faculty Scholarship Forum. We have a really great lineup so far. And so please put that on your calendar. That is October 4th. Come in and view your colleagues' work in the Great Hall. Other than that, I will turn it over to Amanda.
All right. Thank you. All right.
Wait,
I'm go.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Ashley asked me to remind everyone, please always accept your meeting request when it's sent to you so we can make sure that you are coming or not coming. So we can do that. Thank you.
She sent one out like back today.
Yeah,
That was just a
change time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just making sure.
If you did it before, then that was. I have to do a food head count 72 hours before. And most of the time, I just count everybody and find out, but we need to try to be a little more. Yeah. Thanks.
So the first question I have for everybody is kind of a logistical thing dealing with those calendar schedules. There was a bit of a discrepancy as to whether this workshop is an hour or 90 minutes long. This is one of those workshops that can either work in one of those 2 time frames, so I want to leave that decision up to you guys that are here. So the question is, do you want me to wrap up the presentation within an hour, or do you want the presentation to go a full 90 minutes? Like I said, we can make it work in either way. So we're just going to do a show of hands on this as a quick little vote. If you would prefer an hour-long workshop, please raise your hand. I have a feeling that will be the majority. If you would prefer a 90-minute workshop, raise your hand.
I guess I just need the extra 15.
I am happy to stick around at the end. So what that means, I was kind of planning on an hour. That's what I had originally had on my calendar. But know that this is the kind of topic that I could talk for a whole days and days and days on. So today we'll just kind of be giving you a little taste. Today we are talking about Amanda's 10 commandments for successful discussion board assignments. I think everybody here knows me, but if you don't, my name is Amanda Dills. I'm the instructional technologist here on campus. And I love talking about discussion board assignments because I have a very passionate love-hate relationship with the D2L discussion board and discussion boards in general. If you haven't already done so, I know I mentioned this as everybody was walking in. There's a Padlet survey that we're going to take a look at really quick. And this is where we're going to do introductions rather than having us go all around. We're going to try to be digital with our introductions. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up and see what we have for who's here and the questions that you guys are wanting to have answered. And I kind of peeked at this before and I saw a lot of questions about engaging discussion board posts. That seems to be the theme, and if that is your question, you are in absolutely the right place for you. That's really what we're going to talk about. If you've tried to use discussion boards before, you know that the technology to set them up is pretty easy. Like, it's a pretty easy tool to get rolling, but it's a really hard tool to get rolling well, like to get rolling in practice. So that's really the focus of what we're going to talk about today. There was a question about timelines and getting people to post early. We're going to talk about that. And it seems like that's pretty much the themes. I will go back and look through all these questions. So if you're still filling it out and I haven't seen your question and I don't get it addressed during the workshop, I'll either do like a follow-up little article or something in the D2L shell for this, just so I make sure I address everybody's questions. But it looks like we're all on the same page. We all kind of have the same questions, which are sort of the universal questions that everybody has about the discussion board. Our objective today is banishing crappy discussion board assignments from this campus. This is a big task. We're not going to get it completed today, but hopefully we can kind of start a movement that will spread and we will all be enlightened as to how to not have crappy discussion board assignments. Because the fact is, it's really, really hard to not have crappy discussion board assignments. I mean, it's a thing that's kind of a universal struggle. And that's the case for two main reasons. Number one, discussion boards have what I call baggage. And number two, discussion boards are what I call tier 3. So we're going to break that down just a little bit. When we say baggage, I mean that discussion boards as a technology are really old. They're one of the first ways that people communicated on the internet. Back when I started in online learning, it was about 10 years ago. And that was when all the other stuff was just starting, but discussion boards had already been around for a long time. So back in the day, if you were doing an online class in a tool like Blackboard or D2L, your typical weekly assignment would be read this chapter, answer the questions at the end of the chapter on the discussion board, and reply to 2 of your classmates. And I still get like twitchy and nightmare-y about those particular assignments because I saw it, and it was not at the school. I saw it over and over and over, and that was all anybody did because it's all anybody could do. So when we're thinking about the discussion board, we have to get rid of some of that baggage. The other piece of baggage that goes with that is that when people think about an online course, and this happens all the time, somebody comes to me and they say, I want to put my course online, and the first thing they're wanting to do is a discussion board. And that's always where everybody's brain goes first, because that's what's been around the longest. Well, the problem with that is the second point, which is discussion boards are what I call tier 3. And I know this is kind of hard to read, and it's nothing you have to know in depth, but I'll just kind of talk you through it. I like to talk about interactivities online being in a couple different tiers. And tier 1 is the instructor publishing stuff out to the students, so you're just using content. Tier 2 is students turning in stuff to you on the discussion board. So that's like your Dropbox and your quiz tool. Tier 3, which is where discussion boards fall, is the tier where students can communicate with each other. And as you go up those tiers, you get more engagement and more involvement and more activity from the students as you go up, but you also get way more instructor responsibility. Because as you go up those tiers, there's more possibilities for what students can do, which means there's more ways that students can do things wrong or do things that are not what you're expecting, which means you as the instructor have to be even more on your game, more comfortable with the technology, and more specific in your instructions with your students. So if you were coming to me, and I think most of the folks that I see in the room today are some level of D2L vets, they've been doing technology for a while. If you were to come to me as a total newbie and say, I want to put my course online, I would say, okay, the first semester we're just going to put content up. The second semester, let's maybe try Dropbox. And I would make you wait like a full year before I would encourage you to do the discussion board, just because it's hard and there's lots of variables. So what we're going to assume for the purposes of today is that you all have put in your time, you're comfortable with kind of content, you're comfortable with Dropboxes and quizzes, and you're ready to sort of dig into discussion board. Because discussion boards can be pretty magical when they go well, but they're just really hard to get to that magical place. This is how we're going to get there. It's what I call my 10 commandments for discussion board assignments. This kind of shows you how the commandments are divvied up. The first 3 that we'll talk about are just with how you conceptualize your discussion board assignments, like thinking from the very beginning. Phase 2, when I say crafting, I mean that's how you're writing your specific discussion board directions. And then about the last 4 or so commandments have to do with just tips and tricks and ideas and things that will help you kind of be even more efficient. If you haven't already done so, there's a worksheet in the back that we'll be kind of working through. I will refer to it not with everything. We probably will have points on here that I don't go over talking because we do want to keep this within an hour. But know that this is something you can kind of work through. Feel free to use it to take notes. The first 6 commandments all tie into a question, so that can kind of help you keep track of where we are as we're going through today. All right? Any questions or concerns before we leap forward and start talking about the 10 commandments? All right, without further ado, oops, come here. Here we go. Amanda's 10 Commandments of Discussion Board Use. So the first thing that I want you to do before I even tell you commandment number 1 is I am going to make everybody do number 1 on the worksheet. And number 1 on the worksheet says list 3 to 5 situations, assignments, or topics for which you either are considering doing a discussion board assignment or have assigned discussion board work in the past. Don't have to be super detailed about it. A word or two is fine for each of them, but I just want you to make a super short little list of topics you either have or may want to assign a discussion board on. And we'll take just a couple minutes to do that. And I'm not going to have everybody go around the room, but as you're finishing up, is there a person who would like to volunteer their list? Let me use you as an example. Aaron, go for it.
Presenting visual research for feedback. Taking play discussion out of the classroom and prompting discussion. Peer critique in a non-combative, non-confrontational way.
Love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So we're going to get to that list in just a second. And obviously everybody has their own lists that may be different or similar. I do also just have to bring attention to it because I'm so proud of it. The beautiful graphic that has the tablet in front of the mountain with the 10 Commandments on it. I thought I was very creative when I put that together. Thank you for your laughter. I appreciate it. Okay, so commandment number 1 is thou shalt remember the unique functions of the discussion board and use it for those functions only. This goes back to what I said all those discussion board problems sort of historically are, and they stem from the fact that people want to use the discussion board for things that the discussion board is not really best at, okay? If you are having students write answers where they're all probably going to write kind of the same thing, don't do that in the discussion board. You don't want to grade it. Nobody wants to read it. It's super boring. There are better tools for that. Not that you shouldn't do it, but there are better tools for it. There's kind of 4 things that I think the discussion board is really good at. The first one is if you want students to contribute to the content of the class. So if I've talked to somebody where they were having students share resources that they found that pertain to the topic, this is really kind of the only medium native to D2L that will let you do that. So that is one really good use of the discussion board. If you're having students contribute to the content, whether it's things that they find or if it's like personal anecdotes that only they are going to be able to share. So like, let's say it's you're teaching a musicals for dancers kind of course and people have personal anecdotes about a musical they were in, only they can tell that story. So that's a good use of the discussion board. The second one is feedback. Again, because it's one of the only platforms where students can talk to each other, having students do feedback in the discussion board is a good, effective use of that discussion board. Though you will want to give some like clear guidelines, and we'll get to that in kind of the second phase of the commandments. The third reason is for having students genuinely connect with each other. Again, it's because it's the only sort of native tier 3 tool in D2L. If you want students to talk to one another and you literally want those conversations to happen and not just be kind of a busy work because I feel like they should be talking to each other kind of thing, discussion board is great for that. And then the fourth thing that the discussion board is really good for is for involving some of those higher levels of thinking. I don't know if any of you were at the speech with Clive Thompson last night, but one of the things he talked about for getting people to interact online and when it works really well, and when it works really well, what the things he said was that if people have time to think on their own and then reflect and share things with one another, that's when really good collaboration happens. And that's, I think, the big difference between discussion board discussions and face-to-face classroom discussions. In face-to-face classroom discussions, you get a lot of the quick kind of immediacy, familiarity, ping, 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 everybody bouncing ideas off one another, and that's wonderful. You get a different kind of thought when you do the discussion board well, because then you're getting the deeper thought. You're getting people have had time to go reflect on what they saw, what they read, what they heard, and then they're having time to bring that back out. You'll also find that some students are just a lot better at expressing those deep thoughts in a digital environment than they are in a face-to-face class. I was teaching a course last spring, and one of the students just had these beautiful, detailed answers, and she was the kind of student that didn't do well in class, like social anxiety kind of issues and things like that. And so for students like that, this is a really good way to have them express themselves. I have a link here to Bloom's taxonomy. If you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, those higher levels of thinking, the analysis, evaluation, those kinds of things where maybe there's not a clear answer, the discussion board is great for those, because anytime you're going to have students giving different answers by design, that's what the discussion board is really, really good for. So just to sum those up, students are contributing to the content of the class, students are giving each other feedback, students are genuinely engaging with each other, and students are doing higher level thinking. What I want you to do right now is look back at your list, and if you have any discussion board assignments that don't fit one of those categories, cross them out. Not that you shouldn't do those assignments, but maybe they're better relegated to a Dropbox assignment, or maybe they're better relegated to a quiz or something like that. But we're talking about discussion boards, so we really want to make sure we're doing things that the discussion board is good at. There's a link, and this is available in D2L as well, to a flowchart I have that says what D2L tool do you want to use. And so it asks you questions about how you want to use it, and it will take you through what tool I think you should use. So that's another resource that's available to you. All right, any questions on that? All right, we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about commandment number 2. And this is, thou shalt understand the structure and hierarchy of the discussion board when setting up assignments. This is probably the one kind of really technical commandment as far as the mechanics and the technology goes. A lot of people are confused about the terminology D2L uses, because when we talk about discussion boards, we just kind of all say forums and posts and don't really think about what we mean by that. In D2L speak, forum means something very specific, topic means something very specific, and thread and reply all mean something very specific. So when you're setting up your course for the discussion board, you want to think in terms of forums and in terms of topics. In D2L, we always have like the groups of things and then the things themselves. So in the content area, we have like modules and then we have topics. In the gradebook, you sometimes have categories and then gradebook columns. Discussion board is one of the places where this is enforced, and you have forums and then you have topics, and the best way to remember the difference is that topics are what tie to gradebook columns. So whatever you're going to assign a single grade for, that's what you want to make the topic. So when you're trying to decide how to set things up, I generally would recommend starting by thinking about topics and think of them as gradebook columns. And then think about which one of those topics might be grouped together into a forum. In a lot of cases, if you're not using the discussion board a whole lot, you're just using it a little bit, you might just have one forum. And that one forum might just be class discussions. And then you might have 3 or 4 or 5 topics within that forum. If it's an online course or a course where you're using the discussion board a lot more heavily, you may want to have a forum per week. Or if you have a bunch of topics, discussion topics that are all centering around the same theme, those might be a forum, okay? So what I ask you to do on number 2, and we're not going to take a ton of time to do it right now, but is to just, when you're thinking about setting up a new course, kind of sketch out how you want those topics grouped. The other thing I want to point out that is a new feature in D2L is there is now a new feature, and I probably need to update my graphic, where within topic A, you can have it so if, let's say, you have groups in your course and it's a big class and you have some discussion groups, you can make it so that within topic A, this could be group 3's thread, and only group 3 can see group 3 stuff, but you as the instructor can see everybody's. And that's a really new, nice feature, because if you're thinking about tying things to the gradebook, it used to be that you sort of had to hack it and cheat it and have all these extra things, and it didn't tie to the gradebook the way you wanted. Now, if you're doing just a small group discussion, it's just one topic, and it's like a filter. It's like a group filter that goes on. So that's just an important thing that I like to point out, because I think it's a new cool feature of D2L that happened within the past couple of months. Okay. Any questions or challenges you've run into related to the hierarchy and the structure of your discussion board? The one thou shalt not I will give you is that thou shalt not have a separate forum for every topic. I see that a lot. D2L kind of makes that almost really easy to do with the way they have you set things up. And it makes me crazy because it just wastes a bunch of space. If you don't have a specific reason to divide your topics into groups, just have one forum and just put everything in the same forum, and it'll make everybody's life a little bit easier. Okay? Questions? All right. This is a fast workshop, PS, so let me know if you need me to repeat anything. Let's go on to number 3. And this is what I just alluded to. Thou shalt not waste discussion board real estate. Back in the day, when all we had was text and the discussion board was the only way that students could submit assignments, you would get people having students submit essays on the discussion board because it was the only way that they could do it. The after effect of that now is that if people haven't rethought how they're having students do things, or if they're just kind of doing it the way that they think they're supposed to, you end up with discussion board grading nightmares. And it's really, really long, and you have all these pages to read, and it's just not fun to grade, and students get lost. So what I would encourage you to do when you're thinking about your discussion board assignments is I would encourage you to think about how can I have students do what I need them to do, but keep it in the smallest amount of screen real estate possible. There's a quote. Oops, there's my picture. Come here. There's my quote. I got this from a person who does a lot of speaking and teaching about instructional technology, and I haiku'd it to make it into a haiku. And it's one of the hardest things for students to do well is to speak briefly. If you make them give their answer in a haiku, they will spend way more time on it than if you just let them type as many words as they want. Other things that you can do, I suggest, uploading a picture, perhaps uploading a link, give them like a word count limit. Like, I want you to tell me in 10 words or less this thing. The thing that I would encourage you to do that is not necessarily alluded to specifically on this slide is think about when you're having students do their answers, keeping it what I call above the fold. Does anybody know what above the fold means? Yeah? What's above the fold mean, Leslie? Yeah, so you'll hear people talk about it with websites a lot, like what can you see without scrolling? In D2L, and in this particular example, it's not exactly right, but it only shows like the first so many lines. And then if you want to see more than the first, I want to say it's like 3 or 4 lines, you have to click show all. If you can have your students' responses kept in the space before you have to go to the show all, then it saves you a click, it saves everybody a click, it makes it a lot easier to read. So when you're thinking about putting this together, think about how can I keep this above the fold? Now, if you're doing pictures, for example, Erin's example of sharing visuals, that's not gonna work. Pictures are gonna be big, and that's fine. It's not like this is a hard and fast rule, but if you're doing written responses that you just want kind of evidence that students were thinking about a thing, I would always encourage you to go shorter rather than longer with the answers that you're expecting. I always like to say, and I've got it hidden in here. No, come here. Oh, come back. I promise this is going to be cool. Sorry for those of you that Prezi makes you nauseous. I know that's some people. I like to say make students do hidden work whenever possible. And by that, what I mean is if I'm asking you to write 10 words, if I'm thinking of that from a student psychology perspective, I just have to do 10 words, but then when they actually have to do it, it takes all this time because, okay, I have all this stuff I want to say. How do I get it down to 10 words? And I think it's just a neat psychological trick you can kind of play on your students. If by asking them to do less, you feel like, oh, you're the cool teacher that only makes them do haikus. But in reality, you're like asking them to think harder and do more and analyze and things like that. So the question that I have on the worksheet for you as a follow-up are what are 3 ways you can have students generate discussion board post responses that stay above that fold? And we've got just a couple of minutes. We're doing well on time. So does anybody just off the top of their head have some good examples or other thoughts other than what's already been mentioned? Okay, fair enough. Fair, I appreciate that. No, I appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, really just a word count is by far the quickest and easiest way to do that. You can also have students post links, and that's a really easy thing because then they can link to something else and it still stays above that fold. Emojis are great, yeah. To be fair, I'm not quite sure about how emojis work in the discussion board. Have you ever tried it? Does it work? Okay. Perfect. So emojis are fabulous. We love emojis. I'm a big fan. So that takes us into the second section. So before I jump into kind of the mechanics of crafting those assignments, any other questions or thoughts on the conceptualization part? Yeah,
I don't know if this is like too detailed for now.
go for it.
Tell me later. I have had students post pictures, but they're giant, and I don't think the students understand. I don't
Yes.
think the student has the knowledge
Yes.
to know how to post a picture that's not gonna like their eye is like the whole screen.
Yeah, that is a great question. And it's hard for everybody because oftentimes pictures now are so big, they're such big files that when you put it in a thing, like it just looks gigantic. So what I would encourage students to do, and this goes for any sort of moderately advanced technological thing you're going to have students do, is make sure to show them ahead of time and to have them do a discussion board assignment where the whole purpose of the assignment is post a picture that isn't giant. And that is the purpose of the assignment. Because if you're trying to combine tech and content, obviously we want content to be more important, right? And so we want students' brains to be there, but then sometimes they never get the picture shrunk down the way we want. So it is tricky. I will often like post a picture. I want to say there's even like a short video that I've made because this question comes up a lot. The short answer to that is the students post in the picture, and I think you can even paste them in now. But then you have to click on it or highlight it so that the little handles show up in the corners, and then you can drag it in. And that's pretty easy to do. I will say some browsers don't like to make the little corner handles pop up. So you either have to click on the picture or like drag across it. But it is a very real thing, and I would have students do just like a warm-up assignment, which is post a picture, any picture. I don't care what it is, as long as you can get it small. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah.
So I have my students do like a video introduction concept or a picture, and I just had a link that you put together as to how to do a video.
Did you do the video note?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I put that as the link, and so now I need to have a link that says, here's a link that Amanda tells us how to
Yeah.
resize our image.
Yeah, and you bring up something else that is worth mentioning. When I first put this presentation together, video note was not a thing that existed. So if you want students to share videos, just like faculty have the ability to record short videos in the news tool of their course, students have the ability to record short little 5-minute videos and post them to the discussion board. And they don't have to deal with video files, they don't have to upload and download things, they don't have to convert anything. I think they just click like record a video or upload, like do video note. And that allows students to do it, and there is a video for that one on how to do that. So if you have questions about that, I'll try to remember to post the video in the D2L resources area for this workshop, but if you have questions about it, just shoot me an email and I can get that to you as well. Other questions? Lee, did you have a question? He was looking thoughtful. No. All right, anything else? All right, so we've now ideally conceptualize these great assignments that are going to have the discussion board do what it does best. It's going to be brief, it's going to be above the fold. Hopefully already we've started to engage students a little bit better. We had all those questions about engagement. I would probably argue that the biggest challenge for students when it comes to discussion board engagement, and I might pick on Madison over here just because she can give us a student perspective in a minute, but I would hypothesize that one of the biggest challenges for having students engaged is that they don't know exactly what you want them to do. We think that we're very clear, but if you think about the average amount of direction that you give for a term paper compared to the average amount of direction you give for a discussion board post. And I'm talking things like when you do a term paper, you're telling them font and you're telling them, you know, this is how I want it structured, and you've got a rubric and you're giving them all of those details. And very often discussion board posts, because people either aren't sure of the technology or they're not 100% confident in that they've thought about it or they think students can read their mind, I'll see very vague things. And that's kind of what this little picture is alluding to, is kind of vague, please, whatever. Well, what he needs to say is, I need a specific thing. I need you to give me money, or whatever the case may be. Very often in the discussion board, I see instructors not saying specifically what they want. And that really is kind of the gist of these next 3 commandments. I don't know, Madison, I said I was going to pick on you. Have you ever had vague discussion board assignments?
Yeah, I think it's because, like, you know, the professor doesn't understand how discussion board works, and the students don't really either because we don't use it as much as we use the rest of D2L. So, like, when you give us vague questions, it's daunting because you know everyone's going to read it, and like in class you see people's reactions, but when you're typing you don't, and so you don't know what other people are going to think about what you're saying, and so if the teacher doesn't have a very specific question they're asking, you don't know if you're even saying the right thing, or if people will judge you for what you're saying.
Yeah. So I'm just going to rephrase that for the microphone, is that if you don't know what the student is wanting, you're already nervous about sharing your content with your peers anyway and sharing your thoughts. If you don't have clear guidelines, it makes it even more difficult to do that. Another thing that Clive Thompson alluded to last night was there's like a performance effect where when students had to write papers that were just for the teacher compared to when they had to write papers that they were going to post for their classmates to read, they were like 40% better when they had to post them for their classmates to read. And that's a great purpose of why the discussion board is good, right? It does make people work harder, but you have to realize that the flip side of that is that kind of anxiety if those students don't know exactly what you want. So hopefully with these next 3 commandments, we're going to help you tell the students exactly what you want. It's also worth pointing out that there's a handout in D2L that goes along with this workshop where I give you some sample discussion board directions, and you are welcome to take that, copy paste, do whatever you want with it, because especially with the technology stuff, it can be a little tricky to get that going and to get used to speaking in those terms. So that's what we're going to talk about. Always, I want you to be thinking about something called backwards design, and this comes into play really all across instructional design in that I want you to think about what you want the students to actually do. Very often we think about things from a perspective of content. We think about, well, I want them to read chapter 2 and I want them to know chapter 2. But then the question is, well, but what do you want them to do with that information? And so that comes into play that, you know, when I was talking about the old school frustrating, make me want to pull my hair out discussion board assignments that were read chapter 2, answer the questions at the end on the discussion board. That doesn't really tell the students what you want them to have learned or to have done or to have accomplished. So think about what is it I actually want them to, if not physically do, then mentally do, and then write your directions accordingly. The next couple of steps, we're going to help you do that a little bit better. So the next commandment is thou shalt include specific technical directions with each discussion board topic. This is kind of like what Lori was talking about with the picture and students not necessarily knowing how to do it. To take it back even one more level, sometimes if they're new to the discussion board, like Madison was saying, they don't use it as much across campus because most of our classes are face-to-face and there's less need for a discussion board. You need to tell them, I want you to start a new thread. Okay, you need to tell them, I want you to reply to a thread, or give them specific directions on what you want to do. Most of the time, you're going to have some generic directions that are going to take you through the entire year, but you do need to share those directions out. It goes back to what I was talking about, it being like a tier 3 sort of tool. Because students have way more options in the discussion board than they have anywhere else, they need you to tell them what to do with those options, okay? So this is where having those sample directions that I gave you are very, very helpful because you are welcome to copy and paste my verbiage. My brain, I know when it comes to writing directions, works a lot differently than a lot of people's brains because I spend all my day explaining technical things to people in words. So that is a skill that I have honed over 10 years. A lot of people it just doesn't occur to your brain to be as specific as you actually need to be. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Here is a sample assignment. What are some ways you can save discussion board real estate in your courses? Not an awful question, but there's nothing in there that tells me how to answer it. So if I'm thinking, like if I'm Madison in this case, I'm thinking, but like how many do you want? How many words do you want? What do I do? Do I reply to people? What do I do with all this stuff? So I'm going to give you the extreme alternative to that, okay? And know that this is the extreme alternative to that. Part 1, there's a deadline. You will be using this discussion board topic to submit and discuss concepts for the final term paper. Tells you what you're doing. Share your paper thesis with your classmates here by starting a new thread. Something that I do is if text in my directions is matching a specific button that they're going to have to click, I capitalize it to match the button. That's just a little technical writing trick. Your thread subject should be your paper title. In the body of your post, write your thesis and a brief description, 15 words max, plus possible subtopics. So pretty clear there. We go even farther, it kind of got scrolled up, but it says you cannot use something that somebody else has already posted. So there was one question on how do we get people to do stuff early. Doing the thou shalt not duplicate rule helps with that because they want to get in there early so that they don't get their idea stolen. And then there's a part 2 that says you must reply to 2 of your classmates' threads, giving them feedback and helping to refine their thesis. It goes into details about what replies are okay. Very rarely do I see discussion board directions that tell students how they want them to reply. I just see, it just says reply, right? Well, but what do you want me to say? Do you want me to say that I liked it, that I didn't? Like, this is telling them this is specifically how I want you to reply. That's going to get people even more engaged. And then there's the third part to that, which, well, now I've got all this great feedback from my classmates. What do I do with it? Okay. So then it's saying reply to at least one of your classmates' feedback comments. It is okay if you decide to tweak your paper, and this kind of goes into specific directions. But if you look on, for example, number 5 on the worksheet that I handed out, it says create sample instructions for a discussion board assignment of your choice, but making sure to include both an initial post, so like the starting of a new thread, the reply, how you want them to reply to people, if you do want them to reply to people, and then if they've had replies, what do you want them to do with those replies? And you really need to tell students specifically what you want them to do in all 3 of those steps. Now, that is not to say that you have to have students reply. I sort of almost have gotten away from having students reply in discussion board posts just because it's always more to read and more to grade. I know one of the questions that was up on the Padlet was, how do I make this not like kill me to grade it, was basically the question. If you do things like saying you cannot repeat something somebody else has said, then you can guarantee that they have at least looked at the posts ahead of you without them even having to reply. That saves you the time from the response. And it's, again, that hidden work. So they think, oh, I don't have to do any replies. But you really did have to like read and analyze everybody's post before you in order to do that. Now, if you're the first person, go team, you didn't have to do any extra work. But that solves the problem of getting them in earlier on the discussion board as well. But really the moral of this story is being specific with what you want them to do. The example that you'll see, I did post a sample discussion board post or topic for you guys to participate in if you so choose after this workshop. And what you'll see I did in that is I already started by creating 3 threads, and then your directions are reply to the thread to the category of things you want to talk about. That's another way you can do it too, where I'm giving students specific instructions that say, I don't want you to do this step, which is the start a new thread step. I want you to just do the reply to step. That's another way to keep that discussion board more manageable. Okay? Questions or thoughts on that? I know that the technical stuff is always a little scary for people, and I think a lot of that fear is where we have a lot of the discussion board vagueness. So if you have any questions, I want to make sure to answer them. Yeah.
One thing that I found helpful is in the reply portion, there's the subject of the reply and then the content. They can put in essentially a title of their reply and then the content of their title. I have them put their name as the subject of the reply. And so it's easy for me to look through the replies and see who has replied if they put their name as the subject.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I do that a lot. The name does show up like beside it, but it's not as obvious as I would like it to be. So that is a fantastic tip. Also, when you're thinking about real estate, don't underestimate the power of that subject line. You can put a lot of good content in that subject line, and that's something that students don't necessarily know what to do with. So that can be another element when you're thinking about, I want you to give me this, 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 and this. I want the subject line to be this one important chunk of information. Okay, other questions? All right. Number 6. Ties into number 5, thou shalt not take the words forum, topic, thread, and reply in vain when crafting discussion board directions. It's sort of like, people say Coke and Pepsi, and those words are interchangeable when you're in the South, apparently, and everything's a Coke, and I don't know, I'm from the North where it's all pop, so I don't know. Velcro is a trademark, and if you say Velcro or Kleenex instead of hook and eye tape and facial tissue, technically you're doing a copyright infringement. Forum, topic, thread, and reply are kind of like that. Because discussion boards are sort of ubiquitous in the online learning culture, we throw those words around, and I'm guilty of it as bad as anybody, throwing those words around interchangeably. We will say, reply to the discussion board, but what we want them to do is start a new thread. Or we will say, you know, post to the discussion forum, but then we didn't create a topic for them to post. So when you're using those words, forum, topic, thread, and reply, make sure you are using them in a way that matches like the button that the students are going to click on or the heading that they will see. Now, if you don't want to worry about that, the words post and response are generic, and you can use those as interchangeably as you want because they're not going to see conflicting verbiage in D2L to go against those words. So if you just want to not worry about the details of the tech and just say things or give directions that aren't going to be confusing, feel free to use the words post and response willy-nilly, and it shouldn't cause any problems. Okay? And so before we jump into the last phase of our discussion board commandments, any questions on writing directions? I think the thing I would like you to take away from is, when in doubt, be very specific when it comes to discussion boards. I know it's higher ed. We like to assume that students are, you know, able to kind of read our minds or figure things out on their own or things like that. But what Madison has said and what you've all experienced is that students don't necessarily like to participate in the discussion board, and I think it's really because they just don't know what's expected of them. So the clearer we can be, and I would encourage you to sort of like err on the side of over clarifying things, especially as you're kind of getting used to it, that you will find a lot more success with your students. Yeah?
Somewhat related question. Do we know if these students are using discussion boards in high school? Is that common?
That's a great question. I'm going to venture that they don't use it much. I think, and that could be why we're having students who, you know, don't really know what it's doing. Because I'm just thinking hypothetically, face-to-face high school classroom, you're probably not, you know, they see them every day. I don't know. That's just a total speculation on my part as to whether they use it. I know they use grades a lot. I know they use content a lot. I know they use like turning in things a lot. But it probably is the tool that they're not as familiar with to begin with. That's a great question.
So anything that does happen, it's because those teachers are just intuitively figuring out what to do. They're not given specific instructions.
Yeah, that's a great question. All right, so we're going to move into phase 3, and this is the tips and tricks portion, which everybody loves, little tips and tricks and doodads. The question, I don't really have a question for this, but I just say on the back, write your favorite tips and tricks. So you're, of course, welcome to do that throughout the whole workshop. The number 7 says, thou shalt incentivize early and often discussion board use by students. And this deals exactly with that question of how do I get them to not wait until the last minute. You will always have students that wait till the last minute, but before I even get into these 4 things, the first thing I will tell you is really, I would strongly suggest staggering your deadlines. And by that, I mean give them 1 deadline for posting and 1 deadline for replying. Because if you do want to get that interactivity going, students will wait until the deadline that you have set, and then if I'm early and I want to reply, there's like nobody to reply to. So if I'm teaching an online course, I generally will say your first post is due by Wednesday, your replies are due by Saturday. Those are kind of arbitrary days that I picked, but I would encourage you to think about splitting those up into like 2 different assignments, potentially even 2 different grades or different parts of the same grade. A few more ways you can do that. Nope, let me go back to here. Okay, so each of these pictures represents a different way that you can kind of encourage that. Up in the top, we see the word dibs. This goes with you can't use something somebody else has posted. So, you know, if I'm asking them, I want to add to the content of my course, I'm asking students to share links to articles they found. If I say you cannot use a link that somebody else has posted and I'm lazy, I want to do it on day 1 because I don't want to have to look at everybody else's posts. So that's one thing you can do. The second thing has some Easter eggs. I love hiding Easter eggs in D2L. I think students like it. I don't know if they do. It amuses me. What I will do in various things is I will, sometimes in like Dropbox feedback or sometimes in discussion board replies and things like that, I will literally type a sentence that says, you have found an Easter egg. For 5 bonus points, email Professor Dills the code #Easter eggs are awesome, or whatever the code is, whatever ties into your thing. It works really, really well in Dropbox feedback because it shows you instantly who's actually looked at that feedback. But you could use it in the discussion board by like having it be a reply, or maybe you create a sample post and at the bottom of that sample post you have an Easter egg code that students can send to you. Now, some people are very anti-bonus points, and that's perfectly fine. You can do with those codes whatever you want. I mean, you know, however you want to incorporate it into your grading or your teaching, but it's just kind of a fun way, and students kind of get a kick out of it. Especially the last time I did it, I got a little tired by the end of the semester, and so it was like, #Professor Dills can't think of any more codes, and like things like that. So you can have fun with it. This next one kind of goes in along with the dibs, but it's don't let people duplicate. So whatever you say, I have to say something different. And then the last one is just finding ways to incentivize that discussion board posting. So whether that's with your grading system, you know, like getting a bit granular about it. If you have, some people like to have a discussion board where students can just ask questions, and you might say, you know, if you can answer somebody else's question, you get a bonus point. I will award bug finder bonus points, where if a student is the first one to like tell me a link doesn't work, or technology isn't working, or D2L is down or whatever, I will give them a bonus point for that too. So figuring out ways just to grade students on posting early and posting often and not just posting. Number 8, thou shalt employ must post first when appropriate. How many of you have tried the must post first? Ooh, only one. I will change your life if you don't know about this. So when you're setting up a discussion board, there's a box you can check that says users must start a thread before they can read and reply to other threads. If it's a situation where you're asking students for something a little bit more in depth and there's no reason that they have to see everybody else's responses before they post, this box is great. And the reason I have the Mr. Lazy and the peer pressure is because I can tell a story from when I was a student here getting my master's. We had discussion board assignments, and being the like overachiever that I was, I would go in and I would be ready to type paragraphs and paragraphs, which doesn't really fall with the real estate rule, but I was ready to do it. And then I would go in and I would see that people had typed like 2 sentences. How many sentences do you suppose I typed when I got in there? 2 sentences. So if you have that must post first on, what happens is when I look at the discussion board, it looks empty. And then as soon as I post, then I can see everybody who's posted before me. If you're doing that, I would definitely tell students, you know, let them know that they won't see replies until they actually post their first thing. But it's a really helpful little tool. I think if you want to let your overachievers overachieve, which often we do, that's a great way to let that happen. Oh, Mr. Lazy. Yep, there we go. All right. And then the last one in this particular row is thou shalt link discussion board topics to the grade book. And let's see if this takes it to you. Yep. And technically, all you need to do this is assign points to the discussion board. When it comes to grading discussion boards, it can be a pain in the you-know-what unless you turn on the assess topic functionality. And what I mean by that is if you make the topic worth a certain number of points at the bare minimum, even if you don't actually link it to the gradebook or do anything like that, if you do that, then you get this beautiful option when it comes time to grade of me going, okay, I'm grading the discussion board for this class. I want to grade Paul. I'm going to click on Paul's name and I'm going to see every post and reply that he has done within that topic on a single screen. I can put in the number and then he gets his grade. It is magical. You also have the option of going to the gradebook, and if you are in the standard view of the gradebook and you have your discussion board graded, you're going to see beautiful little balloon icons next to the names of the students who have posted, and you can click on the balloon icon and you can grade it from there. So if you are using the discussion board for a graded assignment and you are not using the grading function, that one thing will probably save you hours of your life, just that one fact. Because I know people that aren't doing that, they're like manually writing the grades down and then they click to the other screen and then they type them all in. I don't want you to have to do that. I want it to be as easy as possible for you. So that is it's like a big, giant, easy button. And this kind of shows you what the example would be. So that is commandment number 9, okay? Commandment number 10 is thou shalt utilize creativity in discussion board assignments and consistency in instructions and expectations. And the example I have for this is this board game, okay? If you were shown this particular board game, instantly you would know how to play it, right? How do I go about, Lori, how do I go about actually playing and winning this game? Yeah. Yeah, like you roll a dice, you spin a spinner, you go to the thing, right? Like we all know structurally how this goes. But if you were to zoom in, it's hilarious. There's like little pictures from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and there's fun like things that you do. And I think this is a perfect example of creating discussion board assignments throughout the year. Because ideally, your students will get used to the tech, will get used to the format. To take Lori's thing about the pictures, if I know I'm gonna have them post pictures a lot, then I'm gonna have the picture posting technology requirement be the same every time. But you can get real creative in the picture that you have them post. So when you're trying to think about kind of long-term strategy, think about, okay, how can I be consistent, but then within the confines of every time they post, it's going to be, excuse me, 10 words or less or something like that. How can I be creative within those constraints? Pardon me. So it's all about the combination of creativity and consistency. And I say utilize students' creativity too. Perhaps have your students early on brainstorm a list of discussion board questions that they want to hear what their classmates have to say about. Then use those throughout the year. Let those be your directions. But really, focus on making the tech the same every time, okay? But then having fun with what you do with it. And then the very last bonus commandment that I will give you, we've got about 5 minutes left before we're at an hour, is thou shalt utilize thine instructional technologist when needed to help with discussion board assignments. And I really do sincerely mean that. I get a huge kick and enjoy helping people come up with discussion board assignment topics. I like to be creative about it. I like to come up with crazy wackadoo things that you can make students do. So if you are wanting some suggestions or you just want to brainstorm, please do set up time with me. Know that it's one of my favorite things to do. So it is not an imposition. It is actually something I really enjoy. And that way we can spread this gospel of no more crappy discussion board assignments throughout the campus. We've got, like I said, about 5 minutes left before we're at an hour. So first of all, thank you all for being so lovely and wonderful and attentive. For those of you that have laptops, we've got 5 minutes. I'd love for you to get a chance to experience the discussion board as a student, okay? Because raise your hand, how many of you actually have studented on a discussion board? Ooh, more than I was expecting. All right. So here, I'm going to show you where this is. If you don't have a laptop, I didn't tell you to bring one. That is fine. Feel free to look off of somebody else to do this when you go back to your office. This is not required to get your completion certificate, so know that it's just a bonus activity. But if you go to the D2L course shell, the CETL Workshop Hub, oops, it's probably at the bottom. Let me go to content. Uh-oh. There it is. It's towards the bottom. Let me drag it up to the top to make everybody's life a little easier. That's my bad for not having it be at the top. Okay, so now at the top of the content list it says A4 10 Commandments. And you can see the Prezi is there, the Padlet's there, there's a worksheet there. But if you scroll down kind of towards the middle bottom, you're going to see wrap up discussion. And the way I set this up, like I mentioned before, was in this particular example, I don't want you to start a new thread. I want you to reply to one of the 3 threads I've already created. The first thread says new ideas. So do you have a new idea that this workshop has prompted, that you want to share, you want to try out? The second thread is questions. So do you have a question about the discussion board? What are you still hoping to find out? You can reply to the questions thread. Finally, if you have a takeaway, this was one thing I said, I'm going to use this. The challenge that I will give you, and it'll be a little hard if we're all doing it at once, but is to not post something somebody else has posted. Okay? So for those of you that have laptops, I would encourage you to go ahead and post to one of those 3 threads or more if you would like, just to give you a mini tutorial on doing that, because I'm going to look here and there's not really a reply option. If I click on the heading, then you have a reply to thread button. So you click on the name of the thread you want to reply to, and then reply to the thread and type whatever it is you want to type. As folks are doing that, we've got about 4 minutes left in my promised hour. Are there any other last minute questions, thoughts, concerns, jokes that you'd like to share? Yes.
So I'm looking at your D2L tool Flowchart.
Yes. Let me pull that up.
One time you had one specifically for video.
Yes.
Can you post that one somewhere?
Yeah, I can. It probably is in like last year's hub, but I can post it. If I forget, send me an email, say, hey, put that flowchart up. Because yeah, absolutely. Let me pull that up so that folks that don't have laptops can see what she's talking about. One of the things I love in life, in addition to helping create discussion board assignments, is creating flowcharts, because I am a nerd. And this one, especially if you're getting started in D2L, I'm trying to make it so it's a little easier to see. But it starts at the top and it says what describes the kind of communication you want students to accomplish. That's basically deciding what tier of interaction you're going to go to. And then it walks you down through that. As you walk through it, let's see if I can make it easier to see. Can I go full screen? Maybe. All right. It will look better on your own personal computers. But at the bottom, what you're going to see is a list of all the different D2L tools, and it just sort of walks you through, oh, you should use this. If you have questions about that, as always, feel free to ask me. Those are the kind of stuff I really like helping with. Any other questions? All right, well, before I let you all go, like I said, again, thanks so much for being here. By now, once we get you added to the group for this workshop, you will have access to the survey. If you were trying to get in right now, because I'm giving the workshop and I'm normally the one that puts people into the group, you don't have access to it. But by the end of the day today, you should have access to a survey that you fill out to get your completion certificate. If you forget, you will get lovely emails starting probably tonight or tomorrow if you don't fill it out. And the great thing about those emails is that it just gives you a link and it takes you right there. So you don't have to worry too much about it. You'll get pestered some emails until that happens. But if there are no questions, that is all we have for today. Thank you all so much.